A simple woman was mocked and thrown out of her interview. Then they learned her husband was the CEO. Rebecca Collins never expected such humiliation when she walked into Palmer Industries for a marketing position. Water deliberately spilled on her shirt, sneers about her low-class appearance, and finally, dismissal. But when William Bill Palmer unexpectedly arrived at the office, everyone realized their catastrophic mistake. The woman they'd just humiliated was married to the company's billionaire owner. Rebecca Palmer checked her reflection in the mirrored walls of the Palmer Industries elevator. At 35, she still had the same warm brown eyes that had captivated her husband years ago, though today they reflected nervous anticipation. She smoothed down her light pink blouse, purchased specifically for this interview. Nothing fancy, but professional and appropriate. "Top floor, executive offices," announced the pleasant automated voice as the doors slid open. The Palmer Industries headquarters occupied the most prestigious high-rise in downtown Chicago, its glass windows offering panoramic views of Lake Michigan. Rebecca entered the reception area, her modest heels clicking against the marble floor. "I'm here for the 10 a.m. interview for the marketing director position," she told the receptionist, a young woman with perfectly styled blonde hair. The receptionist glanced up, her gaze briefly assessing Rebecca's simple attire before returning to her computer screen. "Name?" "Rebecca Collins," she replied confidently, using her maiden name. For 15 years, Rebecca had built her own career in marketing, steadily climbing the ladder at smaller firms. When the prestigious position at Palmer Industries opened up, she'd decided to apply without telling Bill. Not that he would disapprove, quite the opposite. He had always encouraged her professional ambitions. But Rebecca wanted to earn this position on her own merits, not because she was Mrs. Palmer. The receptionist tapped at her keyboard. "Please take a seat. Someone will be with you shortly." Rebecca settled into one of the sleek chairs, placing her portfolio on her lap. Around her, employees hurried through the office, their expensive suits and confident strides broadcasting success and ambition. She took a deep breath, pushing aside the butterflies in her stomach. Though she'd never worked in a company this size, her qualifications were impeccable. She had the experience, the education, and the innovative ideas to excel in this role. "Miss Collins," called Amber, the receptionist, "they're ready for you now." As Rebecca rose to follow Amber down the hallway, she reminded herself why she was here. Bill had built this company from the ground up, transforming it from a small tech startup into a Fortune 500 giant. She had watched him pour his heart and soul into Palmer Industries, and she understood its values and vision better than anyone. Now, she wanted to contribute her own talents to its continued success. The conference room door opened, revealing 4 executives seated around a polished table. Rebecca squared her shoulders and stepped inside, unaware that she was walking into the most humiliating experience of her professional life. The conference room exuded power and privilege. Floor-to-ceiling windows showcased Chicago's skyline, while awards and accolades lined the walls, silent testimonies to Palmer Industries' success. 4 pairs of eyes turned to assess Rebecca as she entered. "Miss Collins, please have a seat," said Michael Stevens, the HR director, gesturing to the empty chair across from him. His tone was professionally neutral, but Rebecca didn't miss how his eyes flickered over her simple attire. "Thank you for the opportunity," Rebecca replied, settling her portfolio on the table as she sat down. To Michael's left sat Victoria Stone, Chief Operating Officer, her dark hair pulled into a severe bun. Next to her was another executive Rebecca didn't recognize, and then came James, the marketing VP, the position's direct supervisor. His expensive suit and perfectly coiffed hair screamed corporate success, but something in his smirk made Rebecca instantly uneasy. "So," James began, leaning back in his leather chair without bothering to look at her resume. "Collins, is it? Tell us why you think you're qualified to work at Palmer Industries." The emphasis he placed on qualified wasn't subtle. Rebecca took a steadying breath. "I have 15 years of experience in marketing, with a proven track record of successful campaigns that increased client revenue by an average of 37%, she began. "My approach combines data-driven strategies with creative innovation." "Where did you get that blouse?" James interrupted, his mouth curving into a mocking smile. "The discount rack?" Victoria Stone stifled what might have been a laugh, quickly disguising it as a cough. Heat rose to Rebecca's cheeks, but she maintained her composure. As I was saying, my background includes... We've reviewed your resume, Michael cut in, his tone suggesting he hadn't been impressed. You've worked for some smaller companies. Boutique firms, Rebecca corrected politely, which allowed me to gain hands-on experience across multiple industries. In fact, the campaign I developed last year for Henderson Electronics increased their market share by 15% in a highly competitive environment. Henderson Electronics? James scoffed. Hardly a player in the tech industry? Rebecca kept her expression neutral, despite the dismissive tone. Actually, under my marketing guidance, they've become the fastest-growing electronics company in the Midwest. I believe those same strategies could be applied to Palmer Industries' new product line, particularly the smart home technology division. James exchanged glances with Victoria, something unspoken passing between them. You've researched our company, Victoria noted, sounding mildly surprised. Extensively, Rebecca confirmed. I believe Palmer Industries is positioned to dominate the smart home market, but your current marketing approach isn't reaching the demographic most likely to adopt this technology early. For a moment, genuine interest flickered across Victoria's face, but James cleared his throat loudly. Tell me, Miss Collins, he said, picking up a glass of water, do you really think someone from your background fits the Palmer Industries image? He gestured around the opulent conference room. We have a certain standard here. Rebecca straightened her spine. My qualifications speak for themselves. I've consistently delivered results that... Results, James laughed, cutting her off again. Let me tell you about results. Last quarter, I secured a partnership with Global Tech that added $50 million to our bottom line. What exactly in your little career comes close to that? Rebecca opened her portfolio. If you look at page 3 of my presentation, you'll see that, proportionally, my campaigns have... Oh, she's brought homework, James sneered, looking to his colleagues for approval. They chuckled on cue, though Michael appeared slightly uncomfortable. Victoria leaned forward. Miss Collins, while we appreciate your enthusiasm, Palmer Industries requires a certain polish. Our executives represent the company to major clients and stakeholders. I understand that, Rebecca replied steadily. But surely the results I can deliver matter more than... Then what? James challenged, his eyes narrowing. Then looking the part? Then understanding our culture? Then fitting in with the team Bill Palmer has carefully built over the years? The casual mention of her husband by his first name sent a jolt through Rebecca. They spoke of Bill as if they knew him personally, yet she, his wife of 12 years, was being treated like an unwelcome outsider. Before she could respond, James reached for his water glass again. What happened next occurred so quickly that Rebecca barely had time to react. As he gestured emphatically, the glass tilted, sending water cascading directly onto Rebecca's pink blouse. The cold liquid soaked through the fabric immediately, making the material cling to her skin. Rebecca gasped, jumping up in shock. Oh my, James said, not bothering to hide his smirk. How clumsy of me. Rebecca stood frozen, water dripping from her now transparent blouse. The professional facade she'd maintained throughout the interview threatened to crack as she felt the eyes of everyone in the room on her. I'm so sorry, James said, his voice dripping with insincerity. Let me get you something to dry off with. He made no move to actually help, instead taking a slow sip from what remained in his glass. Michael Stevens finally showed a flicker of decency, pulling out a handful of tissues from a box on the table and offering them to Rebecca. Here, he said quietly, not quite meeting her eyes. Thank you, Rebecca murmured, dabbing at her blouse. The thin tissues did little against the soaked fabric, and she knew her appearance was beyond salvaging. Victoria Stone made a poor attempt to hide her amusement. Perhaps this is a sign, she said with false sympathy. Palmer Industries might not be the environment you're accustomed to. Rebecca took a deep breath, struggling to maintain her composure. Accidents happen, she said, voice steady despite the humiliation burning through her. Shall we continue the interview? James let out a short, cruel laugh. I think we've seen enough, Miss Collins. He exchanged glances with Victoria. Palmer Industries has a certain image to maintain. We don't hire... well, let's just say we have standards. The words hung in the air, each one a deliberate insult. We don't hire low-class people, he continued, the mask of politeness completely gone now. Our executives represent this company to billion-dollar clients. We need people who understand our world, who belong in it. Rebecca felt as if she'd been slapped. In all her professional career, she'd never been spoken to with such blatant disrespect. Victoria nodded in agreement. Someone with your background would be more comfortable in a smaller company, somewhere less prestigious. My background? Rebecca echoed, her voice tight. She knew exactly what they were implying, that her simple appearance, her lack of designer clothes and status symbols somehow made her less qualified, less worthy. Don't take it personally, James said, though his smirk indicated he very much intended it to be personal. Not everyone is cut out for the big leagues. Michael Stevens shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Perhaps we should— No need to drag this out, James interrupted. Miss Collins, thank you for your time, but we'll be pursuing other candidates. Rebecca stared at them, their expressions ranging from James's open contempt to Michael's uncomfortable silence. She thought of Bill, of the company he had built with integrity and vision. These people claimed to represent his values, yet their behavior reflected none of the principles she knew her husband held dear. For a moment, she considered revealing her identity, watching their smug expressions dissolve into horror as they realized who they'd just humiliated. But that wasn't why she was here. She had wanted to earn this position through her own merit, not her marital status. I see, she said finally, gathering her dampened portfolio. With as much dignity as she could muster, she rose to her feet. Thank you for your consideration. She turned to leave, her wet blouse clinging uncomfortably to her skin, when James called after her. Miss Collins, the elevator is at the end of the hall. Please see yourself out. The final words were punctuated by snickers from Victoria. Rebecca walked out with her head held high, but inside, a storm of emotions raged. How could these people work for Bill's company and behave this way? The Bill Palmer she knew would never tolerate such arrogance and cruelty. Little did they know, they were about to find out exactly what Bill Palmer thought of their behavior. Rebecca walked briskly down the hall, her heels echoing against the marble floor. The cold, wet fabric of her blouse clung to her skin, a physical reminder of the humiliation she'd just endured. Employees glanced at her as she passed, their eyes lingering on her dampened appearance with barely concealed curiosity. She just needed to make it to the elevator. Once the doors closed, she could let the tears of frustration and anger fall. But not here, not where they could see her. As she rounded the corner toward the elevator bank, Rebecca nearly collided with someone. Strong hands steadied her shoulders, and a familiar voice filled her ears. Whoa there! Are you— The voice stopped abruptly. Becca? Rebecca looked up into the concerned face of her husband. Bill Palmer, founder and CEO of Palmer Industries, stood before her in his tailored navy suit, his expression changing from surprise to confusion as he took in her appearance. What happened? He asked, his voice dropping as he noticed her wet clothes and distressed expression. What are you doing here? Before Rebecca could answer, the sound of laughter floated down the hallway. James and Victoria emerged from the conference room, still chuckling over their treatment of the low-class job applicant. They stopped dead when they spotted Bill. Mr. Palmer, James exclaimed, his voice rising an octave in surprise. We weren't expecting you until this afternoon. Bill barely glanced at them, his attention focused entirely on his wife. Rebecca? She took a deep breath, aware of the employees gathering in the hallway, drawn by the unexpected appearance of the CEO. I had an interview, she said simply, for the marketing director position. Understanding dawned in Bill's eyes, followed quickly by concern as he looked again at her wet blouse. And this? An accident, Rebecca said, though her tone conveyed it had been anything but. Bill's jaw tightened. He turned slowly toward James and Victoria, who stood frozen, their earlier amusement replaced by growing horror as realization set in. Mr. Palmer, Victoria began, her voice unnaturally high. We didn't realize— That's abundantly clear, Bill cut her off, his voice quiet but laced with steel. He turned back to Rebecca, his expression softening. Are you all right? She nodded, standing a little straighter. I am. My office, Bill said, placing a gentle hand on the small of her back. Please. As they walked past the stunned executives, Bill stopped briefly. James, Victoria, Michael, my office, 10 minutes. The three executives exchanged panicked glances as Bill and Rebecca continued down the hall. Whispers erupted among the employees who had witnessed the exchange, the news spreading through the office like wildfire. The woman they just interviewed, and rejected, was Mrs. Palmer. Inside Bill's spacious corner office, Rebecca finally allowed her shoulders to sag. Bill closed the door, then immediately pulled her into a gentle embrace. "I'm so sorry," he murmured against her hair. "If I'd known you were applying—" "That's exactly why I didn't tell you," Rebecca said, pulling back to look at him. "I wanted this position on my own merits, not because I'm your wife." Bill's eyes filled with pride even as anger flickered across his face. "What exactly happened in there?" Rebecca hesitated, then told him everything: the dismissive attitude, the pointed comments about her appearance, and finally, the accidental water spill and the cruel dismissal. With each detail, Bill's expression darkened. By the time she finished, his jaw was clenched so tightly that a muscle twitched in his cheek. "This isn't the company I built," he said finally, his voice a low growl. "This isn't who we are." A knock at the door interrupted them. Bill checked his watch. 10 minutes exactly. At least they can follow one instruction. He looked at Rebecca. "You should be part of this." Rebecca straightened her spine, despite her still damp blouse. "Yes," she agreed. "I should." Bill opened his office door to reveal James, Victoria, and Michael, standing in a tight cluster, their earlier confidence replaced by barely concealed panic. Their eyes widened further when they saw Rebecca standing beside Bill's desk, her composure fully restored despite her damp clothing. "Come in," Bill said, his tone deceptively calm. "Close the door." The three executives filed in, arranging themselves in front of Bill's desk like school children summoned to the principal's office. James, who had been so bold in the conference room, now seemed unable to meet anyone's gaze. 15 years, Bill began, leaning against his desk. "That's how long I've been building this company. 15 years of emphasizing that Palmer Industries' success is built on integrity, innovation, and treating people with respect." He looked at each executive in turn, his disappointment palpable. "So, imagine my surprise when I discover that my executives are behaving like elitist bullies, judging candidates on their appearance rather than their qualifications." Victoria was the first to attempt damage control. "Mr. Palmer, there's been a misunderstanding. We had no idea Miss Collins was your—" "Wife?" Bill finished for her. "And that makes it acceptable? If she were a stranger, it would be fine to humiliate her, to deliberately spill water on her clothes?" His voice remained quiet, but each word landed like a lash. James flinched. "Sir, I can explain—" "Please do," Bill interrupted, folding his arms. "Explain to me why the marketing VP of Palmer Industries believes we don't hire low-class people. I'm fascinated to hear your definition of class." The blood drained from James's face as his own words were thrown back at him. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. No explanation forthcoming. Rebecca stepped forward. "I'd like to hear it too," she said, her voice steady. "Especially since my low-class marketing strategies have consistently outperformed industry standards." Michael Stevens, who had remained silent until now, finally spoke. "Mrs. Palmer, I want to apologize. I should have intervened." "Yes, you should have," Bill agreed. "As HR director, it's literally your job to ensure that interviews are conducted professionally and candidates are evaluated on their qualifications." He shook his head in disappointment. "Instead, you sat there while a qualified applicant was mocked and humiliated." Michael's shoulders slumped in shame. Victoria attempted another approach. "We were simply concerned about maintaining Palmer Industries' professional standards." "Were you," Rebecca interjected, her voice cool, "or were you protecting your territory? Because when I mentioned that your current marketing strategy isn't effectively targeting early adopters for the smart home division, you seemed threatened rather than interested." Victoria's mouth snapped shut, her face reddening. Bill looked at his wife with admiration before turning back to the executives. "Do you know why I started this company? Not to create a playground for inflated egos, but to build technology that improves people's lives." He moved to stand beside Rebecca. "And do you know who was there from the beginning? Who believed in my vision when we were working out of a garage apartment? Who has been my sounding board, my critic, and my strongest supporter for 15 years? The question hung in the air, the answer painfully obvious. Rebecca doesn't need a job at Palmer Industries. She has a successful career of her own. But when she told me she wanted to apply for the marketing director position, do you know what I thought? Bill smiled at his wife. I thought we'd be lucky to have her. Victoria cleared her throat awkwardly. Mr. Palmer, in light of this misunderstanding, we'd like to reconsider Mrs. Palmer's application. Rebecca shook her head. That won't be necessary. James, desperate to salvage the situation, jumped in. Mrs. Palmer, please, it was a terrible mistake. If you'd give us another chance to evaluate your qualifications. My qualifications, Rebecca said firmly, were available to you during the interview. You chose not to see them because you were too busy judging my clothes and making assumptions about my background. That tells me everything I need to know about your judgment and your character. Bill's phone buzzed with an incoming message. He glanced at it, then back at the three executives. HR is preparing your severance packages. What? James gasped, panic overtaking his face. You're firing us? Over one mistake? No, Bill replied. I'm firing you for creating a toxic culture that's antithetical to everything Palmer Industries stands for. This one mistake is merely the culmination of attitudes and behaviors that have no place in my company. Victoria stared in disbelief. But my record, my performance, is impressive, Bill acknowledged. But Palmer Industries isn't just about performance metrics. It's about who we are as people. He moved toward the door, opening it. Security will escort you to clean out your desks. Your building access will be revoked by end of day. As the gravity of the situation settled over them, the three executives seemed to physically shrink. One by one, they shuffled toward the door, their careers at Palmer Industries effectively over. Before they left, Rebecca called out, Michael? The HR director turned, his expression resigned. When I said accidents happen, I meant it, Rebecca said. But cruelty isn't an accident, it's a choice. Michael nodded once, acknowledging the truth in her words, then followed his colleagues out.